Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Well, today, instead of an immortal book, I'm going to talk about a musical. And the musical is called Hadestown. It premiered on Broadway just 7 years ago, so it's relatively new, but it is based on immortal books. It is based upon Greek mythology, and particularly the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. And my daughters are part of a local theater group here that put on Hadestown this past week. And they had a live on-stage band for this musical. I play violin, and so I was asked to be a part of this band. There was a trombone player, a keyboard player, guitar, upright bass, drums, and then violin. And it has this New Orleans folksy style of music, and I love the music so much. So the way I learned how to play violin was to learn by ear. My mom started me on the Suzuki method when I was just 3 years old. And I would listen to songs over and over. I was too young to read music, and so I would just listen to songs until they became embedded into my soul. And to the point where 40 plus years later, I can still play those songs by ear. And so anytime I need to learn new music now, I do the same thing. I just kind of force feed the songs into my head multiple times. And so for the past 3 months, I've been listening to the soundtrack of Hadestown almost nonstop. And I actually looked at the play count in my Apple Music yesterday, and it was over 100. So I've listened to this. I've spent the last 3 months kind of embedded in Hadestown, and it has been a very great joy and delight. So what I wanted to do was take a podcast episode and talk about the musical, but dig a little deeper to see why this musical is so special. It moved me in ways I have not been moved by a musical before. And during the performances, there were 4 performances last week, I was witnessing grown men weep at the end of this musical. And there was just something unique and special about it. And so that's what I want to dig into today. So as I started listening to the music, I came to understand what the story was about. And that just sparked an interest in me in getting to know how this whole thing came about. And luckily for all of us, the writer of the musical, Anaïs Mitchell, she's been on some podcast episodes. So I started listening to those episodes, and she mentioned a book that she had written called Working on a Song, The Lyrics of Hadestown. And so being the book nerd I am, I went ahead and bought that book and started reading it. And I would read it during breaks in the rehearsals to where the kids would be learning a song or singing a song. And here I'd be reading about that song as they were singing it. And I would read about the story behind that song and to a greater extent, the story behind this musical, like how it came about and the different iterations which led to the version that is today and which premiered on Broadway 7 years ago. And it's an incredible story. And so I want to talk about that. I want to tell you about what I learned from Anaïs's book. I want to talk about the mythology of the stories that this musical is based upon. I want to talk about the iterations and changes in the storyline, kind of the twists that Anaïs introduced in the musical, and how I just think those are so cool and so neat. And then I want to talk about the connections to this story to the Bible. I'm reading through the Bible right now. I start each year reading straight through the Bible, and there were just some very deep connections, obviously to Greek mythology, but then there were just deep connections to the Bible. And so I want to talk about all of those things in this episode. And again, for the purpose of kind of plumbing the depths and seeing why this moved me and others so much. So, I invite you into that process with me. And if you are new to Hadestown, I'm going to include some items in the show notes of where you can learn more, where you can find this book, and where you can find recordings of the musical. And if you're someone who is seasoned with Hadestown, like Hadestown, you've seen it, you've been to you've seen it on Broadway and all that. I think there'll be parts of this for you as well, especially maybe in the original mythology stories, and to see how Anaïs took those and formed those into this musical. So I'm looking forward to this episode. This is a special episode here. I usually don't do a midweek Tuesday podcast episode, but was just so enamored with this story that I wanted to put together an episode. So next up, I want to start by just going through the mythology, what we know from Greek myths and Greek literature of the stories that are shown in this musical, Hadestown. All right, you ready to look into some Greek mythology here and see where these stories come from? Well, the place I started was with the Greek tragedies, because I thought surely there must be a Greek tragedy about Orpheus and Eurydice. This is a very tragic story. And so the first place I looked, I pulled my tragedy books down, and there is no tragedy. There's no surviving tragedy about Orpheus and Eurydice from the three main Greek playwrights of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. So that surprised me, but I loved the Greek tragedies so much. I read all of them, and I even got these books called Fragments that tells you of the tragedies that we lost. And so each of the Greek playwrights wrote over 100 tragedies, but for Aeschylus, we only have 7 that survive. Sophocles, we only have 7, and then Euripides, we only have 18 or 19. And so there are a lot of missing tragedies. So I thought surely one of these missing tragedies, one of the ones that did not survive, is about Orpheus and Eurydice. And so I looked through my Fragments books, and there is no tragedy, even ones that did not survive, about Orpheus and Eurydice. So I was really surprised by that. And so where do we know this story from? If we don't have it in the Greek tragedies, where does it come from? And it's part of Greek mythology. And so the way I think about Greek mythology is kind of like the Marvel universe. We can go to a movie now, part of the Marvel universe, and we can see one part of this grand story, this grand mythology around the Marvel universe. Same thing with Greek mythology. These stories just would have been at the Greece movie theaters 2,500 years ago. Everyone would have known these stories. And so little parts of them will show up even in the Greek tragedies, but there's not a Greek tragedy just about this story. And so Orpheus and Eurydice, that tragic story was known, but our accounts, where we get it from, are actually from 2 Roman writers, of Virgil and Ovid. And so one book that you just need to get it's called Mythology by Edith Hamilton. And what she does is kind of compiles all of the sources to put together the story as best as we know them, because a lot of these will just talk about one part of the story. And so what's helpful is to look through this mythology and look up Orpheus and then read that. So I'm going to do that in a minute, but let me give it just a little bit of insight, and we'll start with Orpheus here. Let me introduce you to a few of the characters, or as they say in Hadestown, let me introduce you to a few of them. So let's start with Orpheus. He was the son of a muse, and there are 9 muses, and the muse that he is the son of is Calliope. She is the muse of epic poetry, which makes sense when we know that Orpheus has this musical ability. He has this ability to write songs and lyrics that can move nature. They can move rocks and rivers. And Anaïs talks about this in her book, Working on a Song. And so let me read this part. In the mythology, the music of Orpheus has the power to charm animals, change the course of rivers, and cause trees and even rocks to dance. And I'll end the quote there. And then if we go into, so the father of Orpheus it's either a human father or it is the god Apollo. And what's interesting is if Apollo is his father, it has major connections with the lyre, the instrument, the lyre, and as does Hermes, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. But you've got a mother who was the muse of epic poetry, and you potentially have a father here who was the god associated with the lyre. Either way, Orpheus is a demigod, and he's a demigod in the sense that he has a parent who is a god, but he also has a parent that's not a god. And so he's got bits of both. So if he's full god, he's immortal, he can't die. But Orpheus can die. But he has kind of these special abilities of like being able to play music and have that impact nature. And so I want to read a few parts here from Mythology by Edith Hamilton. Just a little bit more about Orpheus here. So the first part is this: if a quarrel threatened, he would play so tenderly and soothingly that the fiercest spirits would grow calm and forget their anger. End quote. Kind of sounds like David with King Saul, doesn't it? Later on, it talks about how he's on the ship with the Argonauts, and they start to hear the siren song. And if you know the siren song, that the seafarers become so enamored with the song that they drive the boat towards the sirens, and the ship breaks apart and they all die. But when Orpheus knows that the siren song is going on, he takes out his lyre and plays it in such a way that it drowns out the sound of the sirens, and thus saving the Argonauts. And so there's power in his lyre. There's power in his music. Later on, here's a song that Orpheus sings in mythology. O gods who rule the dark and silent world, to you all born of a woman needs must come. All lovely things at last go down to you. You are the debtor who is always paid. Now this is to Hades. All lovely things at last go down to you. You are the debtor who is always paid. Everyone dies. Everyone goes to Hades. Going back into the song here. A little while we tarry up on earth, then we are yours forever and ever. But I seek one who came to you too soon. The bud was plucked before the flower bloomed. I tried to bear my loss, I could not bear it. Love was too strong a god, O king. You know, if that old tale men tell is true, how once the flowers saw the rape of Persephone. Then weave again that for sweet Eurydice, life's pattern that was taken from the loom too quickly. See, I ask a little thing, only that you will lend, not give her to me. She shall be yours, her years span in full. And I'll stop reading there. So that's the song that Orpheus sings to Hades to try to get Eurydice back. I'll get into that story in just a minute. And this song drew iron tears down Hades' cheek and made hell grant what love did seek. So later on in Orpheus's life, he's killed in a pretty awful way, and his body and his lyre wash up upon the shores of the island of Lesbos. And this is how lyric poetry transfers from the arena of the gods, the demigods, to people, because Lesbos is where Sappho is from, and she is the lyric poet. She kind of takes us from Homer to the next step. So Homer's epic poetry and Sappho is lyric poetry. But the story is that Orpheus's body washed up on the shore and kind of transferred that lyric power to a human, Sappho, and we have fragments of her work now. Orpheus marries Eurydice, and so that's where this musical starts off. We find Orpheus kind of wooing Eurydice in a very humorous way, and immediately after the wedding, so this is where things differ a little bit. So in the original mythology, right after the wedding, Eurydice is bit by a snake and dies. And so therefore she goes to Hades. She goes to the underworld because she's dead. And Orpheus descends to the underworld to try to get her back. And so that's what I just read is the song that Orpheus sang to Hades to try to get Eurydice, his love, his wife, try to get her back. So he went down to the underworld. He went to the world of the dead to try to get Eurydice back. And this just doesn't happen. When somebody dies, they don't come back. So this is kind of a unique situation, but his song is so beautiful that he is able to convince Hades to let Eurydice go, on one condition, that they proceed in a single file and that Orpheus not look back to see if Eurydice is still there. The tragedy part of this is that he does look and Eurydice goes right back to Hades. There's no second chance, and the lovers are separated for they don't get back together. So that's the tragedy part of it. The Hades portion is both a god and a location. So people go to Hades when they die, but King Hades rules Hades. And there are three kind of gods and kings over the universe in Greek mythology. And they are Zeus, they're Poseidon, and then Hades. Zeus got control of the sky, Poseidon got control of the sea, and then Hades got control of the underworld. They are all the children of Titans, and the Titans are Kronos, and then the Titaness Rhea. So those are the parents of these three, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. And the three of them did not divide Earth or Mount Olympus. Those were kind of common territory for those three gods. But Zeus was kind of the head person, but Hades was in charge of the underworld, in charge of the world of the dead. In Hadestown, there's a statement that says Hades owns everything and everyone. And you get that sense that since everyone dies, Hades is the king. He owns everything and everyone. Everyone goes to him when they die. But Hades does have a bit of a soft spot. He once fell in love with Persephone. So let's talk about Persephone. Persephone is the daughter of Demeter. Demeter is the goddess of grain. And the Roman name for Demeter is Ceres. And you could just remember that from the word we get for cereal. And Demeter is the nurturer of humankind and the goddess of grain. And so the goddess of food and nurture of humankind. The father of Demeter was Zeus. As you can see, Zeus, he gets around, and so he's got a lot of kids. This is where the seasons come from now, because the daughter of Demeter is Persephone, and Persephone is kidnapped by Hades. Persephone goes a little too far away from other people in a garden and is taken by Hades and raped. So let me read this part in Mythology by Edith Hamilton. Here we go. That year was most dreadful and cruel for mankind over all the earth. Nothing grew, no seed sprang up. In vain the oxen drew the plowshare through the furrows. It seemed the whole race of men would die of famine. At last Zeus saw that he must take the matter in hand. He sent the gods to Demeter, one after another, to try to turn her from her anger, but she listened to none of them. Never would she let the earth bear fruit until she had seen her daughter. Then Zeus realized that his brother must give way. So he told Hermes to go down to the underworld and to bid the lord of it to let his bride go back to Demeter. End quote. So we don't hear Demeter's name in Hadestown, the musical, but in the idea is that Persephone is kind of the reason for the changes in the seasons. And she is, but it's because of her mother Demeter. And Demeter will not let things grow until her daughter comes back. So that's where we get the seasons from, is Persephone gets to leave for 6 months and then goes back to Hades for 6 months. So she's in the above world, and then she goes down below to Hades for 6 months. And so when she's above ground, that's when it's summer and things are growing, the fruit of the vine, all of that. But then when she is below ground, that's when it is winter. You saw Hermes be mentioned there. So Hermes acted on behalf of Demeter to request from Hades that Persephone would be allowed back into the world. But you saw that when she was gone, there was famine and things were bad on Earth. Hermes is my favorite Greek god. I read about him in the Homeric hymns, another great book to get just about some of the Greek gods. And Hermes is just this jokester. He actually created the lyre. He created it out of a tortoise shell and then strings, and he then gave it to Apollo. So Apollo is known as the god of the lyre, but it's really actually Hermes who created it. And Hermes is the messenger god. He's got the wings on his feet. He takes people places. He guides people to the underworld. And then you see in this case where he also went down to the underworld to request from Hades that Persephone be allowed back into the world. The role that Hermes plays in Hadestown is one of a mentor figure. So if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell, that is someone that Anaïs in this book talks about quite a bit, in just kind of the mythology and in that. And Hermes is kind of this mentor figure. He's also the conductor of souls. So he's the one that leads people to Hades. And as Anaïs says, he's the conductor of the musical. So I love that connection, just the conductor of souls, but then also the conductor of the musical. In Hadestown, he is the narrator. A few other people that are in Hadestown are the Fates. And so from the Greek mythology side of things, the Fates are three goddesses who control the thread of life. And Fates are what set up tragedies. If you listen to any of the episodes I did on the Greek tragedies, I talked about how a Greek tragedy is a situation where you are damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. There's just no way out of it. And it's because a fate has been set. And no matter what someone tries to do to get away from that fate, they can't. And that's part of what sets up these tragedies. And this particular musical is set up as a tragedy. It's in the first song. It's a love song, but it's a tragedy. It's a sad song. We hear that over and over. So we know it's going to be something that is sad, but it's still some surprises along the way. So that's what we know from mythology. That's what we know from the stories of times past. But now let's see what Anaïs did in Hadestown and how she twisted some of these stories a little bit for the sake of this musical. Well, despite not having a Greek tragedy for the Orpheus and Eurydice story, we now have a modern-day musical. I actually think that's really neat and really cool. So let's dig into this one a little bit. Here are 5 little changes or twists in the storyline that Anaïs introduced that don't show up in Greek mythology. Maybe there's some hints at it, but here's how Anaïs tells the story a little differently with these twists. I think this is so cool. So here's 5 of them. First one is the idea of there being a song that can set things right. So this whole musical starts off in sort of a post-apocalyptic setting, and things are seriously wrong. And the reason for this is that Persephone is in Hades. So this has set up a sort of climate catastrophe that impacts food and weather. So we see the wind, we see Eurydice is hungry. And so when Orpheus meets Eurydice, he tells her about a song that he's working on. And so let me read a few quotes from that song. I'm working on a song. It isn't finished yet, but when it's done, when I sing it, spring will come again. And later on, Orpheus says, that's what I'm working on, a song to fix what's wrong, take what's broken, make it whole, a song so beautiful, it brings the world back into tune, back into time, and all the flowers will bloom. End quote. So we don't get this sense with Orpheus. We get the sense that his songs can change nature and move trees, but this is almost, there's no longer a reliance upon Persephone coming back. That's what has created this setting where there's famine and everyone's waiting for Persephone to come back, and Orpheus is saying, no, I'm working on a song that is going to fix all of that. It's going to bring the world back into tune. I love that idea. The idea of a song being able to do this, and of all the gods or demigods, Orpheus is the person who would be able to do this. And so I love that Anaïs took this idea of a song being able to change things. And usually it's only gods who can change the world in Greek mythology. But here is Orpheus, a demigod, but someone who is attempting to change how things are through a song. The second twist is in the story of the wedding of Eurydice and Orpheus. So in the mythology, Eurydice is bitten by a snake and she dies. This is right after the wedding. But instead, in this in this play, in this musical, Eurydice does not get bitten by a snake and die. Instead, she has these practical needs of warmth and food. And Orpheus is busy writing this song that can change everything and fix everything. And so he's a little preoccupied and he neglects Eurydice. And so Hades comes in at this point and promises Eurydice warmth and food. And it's a scene heavy with sexual innuendo to this transaction. But there's this idea that Hades is going to be able to provide her comfort. And so Eurydice exchanges this comfort for a deal with Hades. And so Eurydice doesn't die. She more sells her soul in an act with Hades in order to have this comfort. And again, Orpheus is kind of off on his own. He's working on the song when all of this happens. So instead of the snake bite, there's this kind of selling of the soul. And there's this line that said, Hades laid his hands on you and gave you everlasting life. But it's not the kind of everlasting life you want. So at this point, she becomes a worker in Hades, and she becomes anonymous, and she begins to forget there's this idea that your eyes become dim and people don't know your name. And so she just, this is her life. So instead of dying at the wedding and going to Hades, it's more of a choice on her part. And so that's the slight twist in this story here. This the third twist is the song's connection to Hades, and this is where I just think this is the most brilliant thing. So Orpheus, the song that he's working on, it ends up being where it's not a new creation. It is not a new song that Orpheus is writing. It's a song that he's channeling. It's a forgotten song, a forgotten love song of the gods. Here's what Anaïs says about this in her book. I stumbled upon the idea that the refrain was a melody Orpheus had channeled from the gods themselves, the forgotten love song of Hades and Persephone, a gift for Orpheus to deliver back into the underworld. I found this idea endlessly, mythically rich, end quote. Later on, she said, it wasn't wordsmithery that was going to conquer the heart of Hades, but the wordless gift of the forgotten melody of his own song, end quote. I love that. That is so brilliant. This is such a stunning achievement. And this idea that Orpheus's song was actually the love song of Hades and Persephone, but they have forgotten it. And you see in this musical how Hades goes on, and as god of the underworld, the love between him and Persephone has gone far away. And so when Orpheus descends into the underworld to get Eurydice back, and he sings this song, that is his gift. It's the gift of the forgotten music of the gods. And Hermes later on says, this poor boy brought the world back into tune is what he did. And so throughout this story, you've got this young couple of Orpheus and Eurydice holding up a mirror to the old couple of Hades and Persephone. And it's just a brilliant, I loved that. And this idea of a song setting things right, but then that song being a song that already exists and has the chance to impact Hades in the underworld, because it might just remind him of the love he had for Persephone. Brilliant. I love that so much. Fourth twist is that there was this seed of hope. Once Hades hears this song that Orpheus has sung and realizes that it's a song that he once sung to Persephone, there's this part where Hades goes up to Persephone and the line is, and brother, they danced. And then there's just this beautiful musical interlude where they're dancing. There is a little bit of hope. And this is something that Anaïs introduces in this musical. And so Persephone is talking about Hades after this has all gone down. Persephone says, Hades, you let them go. And Hades says, I let them try. And Persephone says, and how about you and I? And Persephone says, "Are we going to try again?" And Hades responds, "It's time for spring. We'll try again next fall." And I'll stop reading there. So it's time for spring, which means Persephone has to leave Hades and go to the above world. But then they'll try again next fall. So there's just it's not very hopeful, but there's a slight glimmer of hope there that we'll try again next fall. Maybe something will happen there. Again, not something you necessarily see in the mythology. The other thing was the introduction of workers in Hades, and so this is when you're in the scenes that are of Hades. There's this small group of workers, and on Broadway they're a very small group. In the theater group that my daughter's in, it was a huge group, and it was really cool because Orpheus is kind of emerging as this unwitting political leader of these workers who are in Hades. And what the director of the musical from last week did was had all of these workers who have lost their names, they've lost their eyes, they've just become anonymous, and Orpheus kind of instills in them this desire to leave. And so what they do in the musical from last week, the director had them go into the audience and be in the audience. And there's this almost like Exodus type of feel to this scene where Orpheus is leading these people out of Hades. And that was just a neat aspect of it. I mean, from Greek mythology that Hades is full. There's a bunch of people there, but one thing that Anaïs did was to turn this into like a modern day factory. Hades is bored for the 6 months Persephone is not there, so he's turning everything into this huge factory, and this the idea of the workers there was just another kind of neat twist in the musical. So those were 5 things that stood out that weren't necessarily in the mythology, but that really enhanced and kind of gave life and new life to this story through this musical. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about Anaïs Mitchell, the writer of Hadestown. So who is this person who created Hadestown? Well, her name's Anaïs Mitchell, and she's a singer-songwriter and was always interested in the Orpheus story. Since Orpheus is a singer, she kind of related to his story, and so she started writing songs that she would perform in her concerts. And they were songs about Orpheus. And she eventually recorded an album called Hadestown, and I believe that came out in 2010. And she called it a folk opera, which I think is a cool name. But that was the album of songs that it was not a musical at that point, but it was songs about Orpheus and many of the songs that ended up in the Hadestown musical. She was just performing those with her band. And so along the way, she began working with people in musicals and started coming up and turning this into a musical. And that's part of what this book describes, is just that process and all the people involved on the music side of things, on the drama side of things, the story, kind of making sure everything connected in the story. It's just an amazing thing to read about on how that came about. And one thing I found fascinating about the book was just her acknowledgement of storytelling formulas. And she didn't set out to follow a formula of how to write a musical. In fact, she even talks about a book that talks about formulas for writing musicals. And that was not her style. Her style was more of this kind of scrappy way of just putting together a musical. And what was amazing, though, is that she kind of fell into these storytelling formulas, and just that, like, in a way that just shows, okay, there are some overarching things about human storytelling culture. And she saw that just in the process of putting this all together. And in that same vein, she talked a lot about things having a particular feeling. And so she would talk of things that felt archetypically right, or felt mythically spot on, or mythically on point, or endlessly mythically rich. And I thought that was so cool. I mean, that there was a specific way. I mean, she's channeling a Greek myth, so that it's already mythically rich. But within that, even things kind of feeling archetypically right, and this is the right decision for this scene because it's right. It just there can't explain why, but there's almost a storytelling formula that this story fell into. I thought that was very cool, and it connects to my next segment where I want to talk about connections to the Bible. Well, one thing I love to do with this reading project is to find connections between the Bible and other works of literature and just other works in general. So that's one of the main reasons I start off each year reading straight through the Bible. And I try to do that between January and February. I just start on the page 1 and I read to the end of Revelation. And so especially with this musical taking place in February here, I'm reading the Bible as I'm preparing for this musical. I just started seeing a lot of connections, and I think this is probably a main reason why this musical moved me so much. There were some deep connections, and even ones that Anaïs highlights in this book. And it was not her intention at all to connect the Bible to this musical, but nevertheless, it happened. And so I wanted to just talk about 4 different areas in which there were connection points. And I want to start with one that I thought was just amazing. And it was a connection between Persephone and Eve. And this is one that Anaïs highlights. And so I'm going to read from her book and just talk about this one. So here, I'm going to read a good chunk here. So stick with me, but this is really cool. He knows what happened in the garden. During years of rewriting Hadestown, I had an intermittent love affair with the idea and image of the garden and how it might fit into the epics and the story as a whole. In London alone, all 3 epics began with what I called garden stanzas. The initial text was, and this is Orpheus singing, "There used to be a garden. There used to be a woman and a man. I don't know how their story ends, but that's how it began." She continues on. Epic 2 had the alternate lines, "I don't know how the world will end, but that's how it began." Some were confused by the Judeo-Christian resonance of the garden stanzas. I found it fascinating that the story of Eve so closely resembled that of Persephone. A woman eats forbidden fruit and the world becomes more complicated. But I was also uncertain whether the resonance was helping or harming us. I eventually replaced the line, "There used to be a garden," with "back in the beginning." But the garden language survived elsewhere in Epic 3. Lady Persephone walking the garden, and where is the man with his hat in his hand who stands in the garden with nothing to lose? The London version of Epic 1 also included this verse, and then Orpheus singing, and at the end it says, "in a garden." And then I want to read this last part here. What made the garden so appealing to me is that it was kind of an archetypical shorthand for the state of grace from which the world has fallen and to which it might be restored. And I'll stop reading there. I was utterly fascinated by this. I put a bunch of stars by this whole section in the book as I was reading it. I hadn't even considered the connection between Persephone and Eve there, but there it is. But just the fact that Anaïs kept having this garden imagery come up as she was writing this musical, that just blew my mind. But I think it's one of those deep connection points, and it's hard to get away from. Second deep connection point, and this is something I noticed. One of my favorite stories in the Gospels is when Jesus meets the woman at the well, and this is found in the book of John in chapter 4. And there's this element of when Jesus starts talking to this woman at the well, where she's sort of mocking him, and she quickly realizes that this is no ordinary man. to the point where she goes back to her town. And this is a woman who's had 5 husbands. And she goes back to the town and says, "This man told me everything I've done. You need to come meet him." No one says that if someone just exposed you for everything you've done. But there was something about Jesus in that story that there was a monumental shift within one conversation. And that's what happens at the beginning of this musical, where Orpheus goes up to Eurydice and he very awkwardly and very humorously proposes to her, like, right away, and, "Come home with me. I want to marry you." And she's like, "Who are you? Like, what are you always like this? What are you talking about?" And then Orpheus begins telling her about this song that he's working on. And I want to read these parts because they're just so beautiful. But you see this monumental shift take place in this one song, and it just reminds me of the Jesus and the woman at the well story. So Eurydice starts off the wedding song with this: "Lover, tell me if you can, who's going to buy the wedding bands? Times being what they are, hard and getting harder all the time." And then Orpheus responds, "Lover, when I sing my song, all the rivers will sing along, and they're going to break their banks for us. With their gold, be generous, all a flashing in the pan, into fashion for your hand, the river's going to give us the wedding bands." And Eurydice goes on, "How are we going to get the wedding table?" And Orpheus responds to that. And then Eurydice says, "So when you sing your song, the one you're working on, spring will come again. And so why don't you sing it then?" And so Orpheus sings it. Even though he's not done with the song, he starts singing it, and a flower just comes out of nowhere. And Eurydice says, "How'd you do that?" Orpheus says, "I don't know. The song's not finished, though." And Eurydice says, "Even so, it can do this?" And Orpheus says, "I know." And Eurydice says, "You have to finish it." And then she asks the questions again, but now she's answering. And Eurydice is saying, "And the trees are going to lay the wedding table." And so there's this monumental shift. And when you hear the song, it's so beautiful. And when you see the acting, there's this mocking to belief. And it is such a beautiful scene. But every time I hear that song, every time I see that scene, I think of Jesus and the woman at the well. That may be a stretch. Maybe you don't see that. But, oh man, every time it's just, I get like teary-eyed. It's incredible. So the third deep connection point is Orpheus confronting death. So in this story, Orpheus goes down to the underworld to get his love. And Hades makes this comment in this musical: "Everything and everyone in Hadestown I own." He owns everything. He owns everyone. Everyone dies. Everyone goes to Hades. He owns everything. He's the king. He's the king of death. He owns everyone who dies. And here comes Orpheus in sort of a Christ-like figure manner and goes to Hades to rescue his love. In Revelation 1:18, it says, Jesus says, "I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades." It's just incredible. But Christ kind of takes it a step further by defeating death. But here you've got Orpheus as sort of a Christ-like figure going in to, you don't go to Hades, you don't go into death to take someone out, and yet Orpheus does so, and he's able to do so because his song is so, he can melt the hearts. All the people guarding Hades, when they hear his lyre, it's just so beautiful that they don't resist him. So I thought that was a neat connection, just Orpheus confronting death. The fourth connection point is this idea of not looking back. And so there's the obvious allusion to Lot's wife. When she looks back at Sodom, she's told not to do so. And when she does so, she's turned into a pillar of salt. Orpheus, in this story, he can take Eurydice out of Hades, but he cannot look back at her, and they've got to travel in single file line. So he's not sure if she's still back there, and he looks back right when he gets back to Earth, and she's still kind of climbing up. He looks back, and she has to go back to Hades, and they've lost there's no second chance in this one. And so the one thing I didn't, I kind of thought about it of like in that just the physical looking back, but someone mentioned to me, well, what about like just looking at, like, you can't look back to the past. And that being another element of this, the past is past. You can't go back and change that. And there's even a line towards the beginning of the original musical. It didn't make it to the final production, but this is early on. And there's this line. It says, "No use talking of a past that's past. Set out walking and you don't look back." End quote. So you see that allusion even right towards the beginning of what's going to come in the musical, and just this idea of not looking back. Well, those were four different areas that stuck out as deep connections with the Bible. Let me close now with the following. I mentioned before this line: "The kingdom will fall for a song." We see Orpheus, his ability to create a song that impacts nature, that nature obeys, and to write a song for his purpose of trying to make things right. Things are not right. Something happened. Something tragic happened. There's famine. There's chaos, and Orpheus is attempting to make things right through his song. Hades understands the power of this song. He hears the song. He knows that it's a song that he once sang to Persephone to woo her, and he understands the kingdom will fall for a song. This song has the ability to potentially create the downfall and cause the downfall of the kingdom of Hades. It's just an incredible idea. There's the first name for this musical that Anaïs says is that it was called A Crack in the Wall. So before it was called Hadestown, it was called A Crack in the Wall. And the idea was that there was a crack in Hades, and Persephone would point people in Hades to this crack that allowed them to see the stars. And so there's this idea of hope, this crack in the wall of Hades. I think it's such a neat thing. Let me close with the last part of the book that Anaïs wrote this about the creation and the creation process. But when I step back, I see a different picture. I know that Hadestown is, and this goes for any creative endeavor, I reckon, so much more than what meets the eye or the ear. What is seen and heard on stage is the blooming flower, but most of the plant is underground. Every line, verse, or chorus, every idea any of us who worked on it ever had, even the ones that never saw the light of day, they're down there. They're the roots of the plant, and the flower wouldn't exist without them. The ones who bloom in the bitter snow bloom because they are supported from below by 1,000 tries and failures. End quote. I just love that. It just perfectly encapsulates what you see in this book and how this musical came together. And there were so many beautiful lines that Anaïs wrote, so many lines of poetry that did not make the final cut, but you see traces of them in something else that is said or a particular song. And that's such a great thing to consider in any creative process. Just knowing that you're working on things that may not make it, but it's part of the process, and maybe traces of those things will make it into the final part. But don't despair. Just keep going. That's part of the process. To take a step back, this is such a beautiful musical. I'm hoping that some of what I talked about on the mythology side of things, on the connection to the Bible or to other literature, maybe just helps you understand why Hadestown impacted you. Maybe you have not experienced Hadestown yet, but you will. Maybe this just gives kind of a little backstory to the musical, to the myths that it is based upon. But this is a unique musical, and it's a very powerful one. And so give it a listen. I've got in the show note links to the music. You can see it, the musical performed. There are some YouTube videos of different songs from the musical and that sort of thing. You can also see it in New York and in London, in different locations as well. Look for youth theaters doing it. There's a teen version, and that's what the one I was a part of. They performed the teen version of Hadestown. So you might even be able to see this kind of locally in your area. But I recommend it highly, and I've just had a blast getting to know it, and it's such that I can't get enough of it. I just keep listening to the musical even after the performances. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening on this kind of midweek podcast episodes out of the norm here. I'd love to hear from you, especially if you are a lover of Hadestown. If you have some other insight or things that have stuck out to you, you can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com, or even better, if you just reply or leave a comment right on this podcast episode on Substack. That way other people can see it and they can comment on it as well. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter. It's just @BooksOfTitans. I will be back this Friday. I'm going to do another update episode as I'm working my way through the Bible here. So just kind of highlight what stuck out the week before. And so until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening, and give Hadestown a listen. I'm out.